and I'd like to welcome her to speak to you a bit more on the research side of what we'll be doing on the think tank part for Rise Egypt with the social enterprises. Thank you, Mona, for being here.
For once, I can actually see over the podium. This is really exciting, actually. So, good afternoon, everybody. I know you're all really exhausted and tired. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about research and the importance of evaluation throughout the life cycle of a project. And I'm just using the word project because I'm going to try to make this easy, as easy as possible for people who are not experts. And, rather than focusing on words that, maybe are too specialized, I do teach this at the graduate level, so this is not one of my lectures. And I'm going to start off with asking you the question, what do these four have in common? The music, the multi-million-dollar industry of music CDs that mothers can play to their babies before the babies are born or after the baby is born in order to raise their intelligence. The DARE school project, the school anti-drug prevention program, which has been now implemented in 44 countries and has been scaled to about 20 million children a year who receive exposure to police officers who talk to them about why they should stop using drugs. The lie detector or the polygraph test, which is supposed to determine whether somebody is lying or not or being truthful based on their physiological responses. And the Tushkana New Valley project, which had the goal by 2020 to transform 500,000 acres of land in the western desert in Egypt to agriculture in order to relocate about 20% of the population. So what do they all have in common? Absolutely. We don't really have evidence that any of these work, or at least not the way they say they're supposed to be working. In terms of the music, there's absolutely no scientific evidence to show that music can support intelligence for children, let alone infants that haven't even been born yet. The DARE program has had years and years of countless studies to show that it hasn't been effective, to the point that the Surgeon General in the United States has put it on the list of ineffective. Of course, now they've changed the program a little bit, so we'll see what happens. The polygraph test is not admissible in court in many jurisdictions because a lot of the evidence has shown that there's a lot of false positives, the examiner bias has a problem, people who are lying can fake the test, etc. And of course, in terms of the New Valley project, although there have been some achievements, the outcomes are disproportionately low compared to the billions of dollars that have been invested. So why do we have projects that don't work very well? Well, there are many reasons behind that. It could be that the theory or the assumptions behind it are not really full, evidence-based, such as the Mozart theory, which explains why the music is supposed to help intelligence. There might not have been an effective assessment at the beginning in order to develop the program effectively. The program is applied in an ineffective manner, or we don't have enough research or evidence, or the evidence that we have is limited or faulty. In short, we have a problem of data. We don't have enough data to support the effectiveness of the program. So now why do these programs continue even if we do have data to show that they're not effective? Well, for one thing, sometimes the ideas are so clever and attractive, they capture a lot of attention. And sometimes common sense says it should work. I mean, it makes sense that people who play music are supposedly more intelligent, so if you give music to a baby, it'll make him more intelligent. So these are sort of common sense ideas. Or it might look like it's working, like with the DARE program. The kids come out of the program saying, I'm not going to use drugs. 10 years later, there's not much of a difference for those who take the program and those who don't. And sometimes there are some components of the project that work, but not all. And then, of course, we have the politics and the money that are behind the project. And this is a very important piece of information, that you might have a project that you've developed that is making a lot of money. You have a huge waiting list of people who want to buy that product or who want to get that services. And there's a lot of enthusiasm and support for it, but it doesn't work. And this is really problematic because if we continue promoting projects that don't work, then we are wasting resources, including money, we're misleading policies, and we could, worst of all, prevent potential other alternative ways of dealing with this project to emerge because your project has sort of taken the center stage. So what do we do? Well, the big thing we need to do is evaluation. And this means collecting data throughout the entire process of developing your project, from doing needs assessment from the very beginning, to developing using research to develop the project in the first place, finding out what has been done before on this issue, what has worked, what theories are supported, and then of course program evaluation in terms of monitoring, looking at the process, the outcome, the impact, and also the economic evaluation of the project in terms of benefit-cost analysis or cost effectiveness. And I'll give you some examples of questions you might ask for some of these steps of the way. In terms of needs assessment, of course, this is the first step of any project. And we need to ask, is there a need for it? What are the gaps in the existing services or products that our project can fill? And if our project is already running, then what are we missing or what can we add that isn't being accommodated? We can also evaluate the process or the way the project is operating or how it's the underlying mechanisms behind it. How was it implemented? Was it implemented as we planned it to be implemented? How can we better the implementation? Did it reach the target groups we were trying to reach? Did it have the dose that's enough to reach and make an effect? How did we reach those target groups in the first place? And what was their reaction as well as the reaction of the other stakeholders and the staff and other people involved? And also, what are the environmental or contextual issues that could also influence the project? We could also evaluate the outcomes. Did the project work? Does it meet the intended outcomes? Which components are effective and which are not? I mean, you could have like a 20-hour program to reach some kind of outcome, but really only 2 hours of them are what you need to get that effect, and you're wasting the rest of the 18. How can the project be improved, and also what are the unanticipated outcomes? And then, of course, we have impact. Did the project produce the results in the long term that it was intending? And do we know that the results that we see are really from this project, or could it have been because of something else? Which is why impact evaluation often uses experimental designs in order to tease apart the differences. So how do we get started if we want to work on evaluation and integrate it as part of our projects? Well, for many groups, the first step is to develop a logic model. A logic model is a visual model of the way, the theory behind how your project is supposed to work. What are the resources that are inputted? What kind of activities are done with those resources? What are the direct products or services that are outputted from those resources and those activities? What are the outcomes from that? And then in the long term, what are the results on the society in terms of impact? So in order to measure different sections of this logic model, we need to collect data. And the data, depending on what you're working on, can be anything from observed data to surveys, instruments, focus groups. Nowadays, there's a whole movement in terms of art-based methods like photo voice, theater, and other kinds of sources of data. All of these things can be used depending on what it is you're trying to measure. What are your outcomes? What are your impacts? How are you going to measure it? Now, when we talk about nonprofits or people who are working with social issues, the measurement is very tricky because oftentimes you're working on very fuzzy issues. How do you measure critical thinking being improved? How do you measure that women are being empowered? Is it because they have more money in their pocket, or they voted in the last elections, or they got divorced from their husband? I mean, really, what are the ways that we can measure things? And this is a very important distinction between the profits and nonprofits, and I'll read you a quote for this. Lack of data, lack of time and interest, and weak systems to devote to data identification and collection, as well as the absence of clear metrics, contribute to the problem of tracking real costs and measuring impact. In the corporate world, market forces offer feedback, and success can be relatively easy to quantify. In the nonprofit world, missions, not markets, are the primary drivers. And I'm going to end with just 5 main tips for those of you who are working on projects in terms of effective evaluation. Number 1, you want to make sure that you integrate evaluation from the start. When you design your program, how you're going to evaluate it should be part of the design from the start, and evaluation should be an ongoing process, including revising your logic model as you go along. It's very important to dedicate time, money, staff to evaluation. This is an important aspect to ensure that your project is effective. And of course, you can't answer every question you want to ask about your project, so you need to prioritize what are the important evaluation questions that relate to the scope and the scale, etc., of your project. Number 4, it's very important to have stakeholders involved in the development of the evaluation, not just giving you the information, but helping you design the evaluation from the start. And number 5, it's very important to make sure that these results results of these evaluations don't just sit on a shelf, that they are utilized to improve the project, to allow the project to be scaled, to build a body of knowledge in terms of this issue, to ensure investors, grant funders, etc., that the project is worthy enough to be funded, and also to use the data from what you've collected in order to influence institutions and policy. Thank you very much.